Good morning. Thank you for coming. I'm Carol Kelly, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Cemeteries Advisory Committee, who deserve all the credit, well, a lot of the credit for the stone behind me. There are other people we need to thank as we begin. I think it's appropriate to start with the person who let us know that the paupers were here. Sharon Cohen connected with me, I believe it was 2021, and at that time, some Canadians had contacted her wanting to know where their great-grandfather was buried. The small flat stone over there belongs to Ebenezer Devine. He died in the harbor. When he died, he was not without relatives, but he was from Nova Scotia. And although some were here, nobody had money to pay for him to be buried, so he was buried in the pauper's lot. From that came this whole project. After we had taken care of Ebenezer Devine, Sharon, with the help of Sandy Williams in the archives, did an incredible amount of research and found the names, death certificates, reasons for death, family information, all of that so that we could then know who was really here. We approached the DPW and Mike Hale with, quite frankly, a rather modest proposal. And I want to thank Mike for suggesting that all the names needed to be on the monument, not just a general statement. And when the stone arrived, it was the DPW that put it up for us, and I believe paved this road for this Saturday morning. Thank you, Mike. I'm also thankful that Reverend Rona Tyndall is here to give us a blessing, and that Mayor Greg Verga is here to do the actual dedication. The people we honor today died between 1905 and 1930, but their lives reach back over a significant portion of Gloucester history. The earliest birth date belongs to Harriet Cooper, born in 1816. She lived to be 97. It's hard to imagine what she saw in her life. She and the other paupers were witnesses to the sweeping events of the 19th century. They were part of the great flood of immigrants, the American Civil War, World War I, and the Spanish flu that followed it. Pressures in Europe pushed impoverished farm workers with no hope of ever owning their own land to these shores, where they farmed and fished and later quarried. Many of the Finns settled here in Lanesville, where their language persists even today, and it's thanks to Rob Branta that any of the names will be pronounced correctly. All had hopes of better lives for both themselves and their children. Whatever their circumstances, when they died, they were old and sick or simply poor. Some had lived long lives where they worked hard and yet found themselves at the end in the city home or almshouse. Others died unnamed, unmarked, in accidents or of tuberculosis and pneumonia. They used to call it the old man's friend. Far from the miraculous cures we now take for granted. For over 100 years, they have been forgotten. But today, we remember their names and gather here to celebrate them. I'd like to introduce the Reverend Rona Tyndall, who will offer us a blessing. Please come on this side so you don't. Thank you.
I find this so touching. In the Jewish tradition, which I'm not, but in the Jewish tradition, there's a saying that the greatest mitzvah is doing an act of kindness for someone who can never repay you. And I commend all of you who have done this art of remembering these people who are buried here so long ago. And I'd like to invite you to join me in a litany of remembering, because that's what you have done here today. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, and you respond, we will remember them. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember them. In the blowing of the wind and the chill of winter, we will remember them. In the opening of the buds and in the warmth of summer, we will remember them. In the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, in the beginning of the year, and when it ends, we will remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we will remember them. When we have joys and special celebrations that we long to share, we will remember them. As long as we live, these paupers too shall live, for we remember them. And a reading from the 23rd Psalm. You can join with me if it's written on your heart in whatever translation you learned it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. I invite you to stand if you're able for the commendation. Into your hands, O merciful Savior, we commend your servants in this pauper's field. Acknowledge, we humbly pray, these sheep of your own fold, these lambs of your own flock, and these sons and daughters of your own redeeming. Receive them into the arms of your mercy, into the blessed rest of everlasting peace, and into the company of the saints in light. Amen. Please be seated.
And now I'd like to introduce Mayor Greg Verga, who will speak, and then placing some flowers on the grave, we will unveil it.
Good morning, everybody. When Carol was speaking earlier, and she mentioned a lot of the people here came from Europe in the late 1800s, early 20th century, it just reminded me how lucky we are. You know, my grandparents came from the Azores and from Sicily, and they were able to get their roots, and now they're buried in cemeteries with proper markings all around the city. And that could have been any one of our forefathers that were buried here. So I just want to do some thank yous so everybody understands who was involved in this. First of all, Sharon Cohen, Lanesville, thank you for all you've done. And let's all hold all the applause to the end. And Sharon did a lot of extensive research on these people buried here in the lot. And, of course, the Cemeteries Advisory Committee, Cindy Barry, Christine Maney, Matt Murray, Cindy Williams, and, of course, Carol Kelly. And our Department of Public Works was already mentioned. There's Mike over there if you want to. Let's give him a hand because he's the guy that goes above and beyond for all these projects. And recently we've seen the dedication of the Battle of Gloucester stone. We've seen the marker down at the entrance to Rocky Neck. And now we have this where citizens saw something that needed to be done, something that the city may or may not have known existed or just didn't have it on the radar to get to. And they only happened because people volunteered, put the time in to do the research, and here we are today. So with that, I'm happy to be here to officially dedicate this stone. And I thank you all for being here. So I like to be brief because I don't like listening to politicians speak. So I hope you agree with me. With that, I think I'm ready to put the roses on. And they've been covered up so I don't cut my hand on the thorns. Thank you so much. If I pick it up correctly.
And now, not the mayor's not important, but for us, the most important part of the ceremony is we feel that now, for the first time in 100 years, each of these names should be read. 5 people have volunteered to help us, and they'll each read a portion of the names and then lay some flowers on the memorial. First speaker is Russell Hobbs.
John Henry Bavola, 1872-1915, a Finn who died of tuberculosis. It was a disease also rampant among the poor and undernourished in Finland, with pneumonia amongst the elderly long before antibiotics. These are the most common causes of death at the time. John Belf, 1880-1915, accidental drowning. August Baroni, about 1845-1910, a 65-year-old Italian paving cutter, tuberculosis. Helmina Amundsen from Norway took this American name, Minnie Beck, 1871-1922. John Beltonimi, 1862-1906. Carl J. Bloom, 1899-1912, only 13 when he died of diphtheria in his parents' home. Sarah Boynton, 1879-1905, a native of Rockport. George Bushy, 1856-1905, lost his father and all hands when the schooner Oliver was lost in 1864. George was a resident of Gloucester when he died in the Ipswich House of Correction on 6 September 1905 of alcoholism and Bright's disease. Ann Byers, 1855-1926. Minnie Carrigan, maiden name Walsh, 1875-1907, tuberculosis. Edward C. Coombs, 1850-1913, also called Edward Edwards. Within a year, his 30-year-old son and wife Jenny also died. Harriet B. Cooper, maiden name Fields, 1816-1913, the 97-year-old widow of William T. Cooper, longest-lived pauper buried here. Her son, William Thomas Cooper, 1854-1920. Ida Perkins Currier, maiden name Zwicker, 1868-1906, from Nova Scotia. In all, there are 22 paupers of Canadian birth buried here. Susan A. Cross, maiden name Donnell, 1848-1916. Charles Day, 1833-1910. Thomas Day, 1830-1906. Ebenezer Devine, 1857-1915, who does also have his own stone which says, "I was lost." And now I'm found. Sorry. It was information about him disclosed when relatives from Nova Scotia wanted to give him the stone that brought the whole pauper section to light. He drowned in Gloucester Harbor, but there were rumors that he was followed into the night by two men with whom he'd been arguing. Minnie E. Dunbar, maiden name Darville, 1868-1914, raised 3 daughters alone after her husband was lost on the Grand Banks. Her daughter Edith Gertrude Dunbar Herrick was 95 when she died, is buried here in Seaside Cemetery within sight of her mother's unmarked grave. And last, David Eklund, 1876-1910, a Finnish immigrant who died of his injuries from being run over by a train.
Thank you, Russell. Sandy Berry?
Good morning. Anna Maud Flaherty, 1899 to 1915, died at the age of 16 from tuberculosis. Emma, her mother, 1864-1915, only 7 months after the death of her daughter, Anna. John Gallant, died 1922. James George, 1908, accidental drowning. Annie Grover, 1829 to 1912, an 83-year-old single woman living in the almshouse, which is a house built originally by a charitable person or organization for poor people to live in. William Harrington, died 1907. Frank L. Harris, 1887 to 1905, an 18-year-old fisherman, died at his residence of diphtheria. This was not just a child's illness. Sophia Lazuri Hendrickson, about 1877 to 1908. According to Dr. R. Garland, her cause of death was toxic myocarditis, a 3-day duration contributed by a 3-week course of typhoid fever. Okay. Charles W. Higgins, died 1916. John Hill, 1852 to 1912, a Finnish immigrant laborer of approximately 60 years of age, died suddenly at the Gloucester police station. Charles Herbert Hines, 1870 to 1907, a single 36-year-old fisherman who lived aboard a vessel, was found dead at Fears Dock on Duncan Street, accidental drowning. Fred Hodgson, 1905, his body was found in Gloucester Harbor on the 19th of June, 1905, accidental drowning. Ed Holmlund, 1841 to 1907, immigrated from Sweden. Jeannie Tremaine Jackson, 1862 to 1907, immigrant from Nova Scotia. John Johnson, 1837 to 1908, a 71-year-old fisherman, died at the police station. He died of heart disease, according to the medical examiner. Martin Johnson, 1844 to 1907, another fisherman who, in his old age, died in the almshouse. It was hard work. Joseph Kalikowski, 1916. Joseph A. Kallio, 1878, from Finland/Russia. Matti Kangas, 1887 to 1912, was a Finnish immigrant laborer, about 25 years old, who died at his residence. According to the medical examiner, the cause of death was pressure of a blood clot following a fractured skull. The police investigating. Result of a quarrel, no action taken after the investigation. An unknown Kelleher died in 1918. He may have been the brother of William Kelleher. That information is written in pencil on the map from the DPW. He presents a mystery of sorts with incomplete documentation, but he's definitely buried here. Hedvig Kunsi Lauma, 1887 to 1912, only 25 years old. Samuel, or Salim, Lake, died 1920, immigrant from Finland. Gabriel Lindstrom, about 1852 to 1905, a 53-year-old widowed fisherman, from tuberculosis.
Sharon Cohen.
I'm always the shortest person in any thing. I want to say that I'm thrilled by this. That's the new heart of this Paupers lot. But for me, the heart of the Paupers lot for the last dozen years has been Minnie Dunbar. She was the first person I found here. I was asked to photograph her gravestone for Find a Grave, and then looked at the map and said, who are all these other people? So Minnie brought me here, and she'll always be the heart of this place for me. I'm doing the M's through O's here. John Mackey, 1847 to 1905. He was a barber who died at Gilbert Hospital of Heart Disease. Henry F. Madden, a laborer, also had heart disease. Susan Hutt McGuire, 1817 to 1911, was a 94-year-old widow who died of a stroke. Thomas McGowan died at Gilbert Hospital in Gloucester. Apparently Mr. Addison had not showed up yet. Died at Gilbert Hospital in Gloucester following an accident with a subsequent amputation of his leg that he didn't survive. Elizabeth McKean, 1857 to 1925, died in the city home, the almshouse. Alan E. McLean, 1885 to 1908, died of the effects of alcoholism. George S. McMullen died in 1917. He was a fish handler. Edmund McVeigh, 1836 to 1907, was a fisherman. He lived on his vessel, but he died at the Hospital of Heart Disease. There were three Martin boys, three Martin brothers who were in the almshouse, two of them together and then one a little bit later. James Martin, 1834 and 1921, was there with his brother William Martin. James is buried here. Did I mention his dates? 1834 to 1921. Excuse me, I have that wrong. George Martin was in the almshouse with his brother William. George's dates are 1848 to 1907. He was a fisherman who died of tuberculosis. He is buried here. His brother William, who was with him in the almshouse, is buried in Beechbrook. James Martin, the third brother, 1834 to 1921, shows up on a Civil War record with a notation that he lost his leg. And even so, he was in the fishing industry. He probably worked ashore. He lived longer than the other two brothers, probably because he got a pension, probably because he got better care. But three boys were in the almshouse and two are here. Alina Tolviti Matila. Alina Tolviti Matila. Okay. 1886 to 1917. Albert Ellery Madison, 1859 to 1926. Aaron R. Miller, 1846 to 1912. He died in the almshouse of pneumonia. Margaret Miller, 1855 to 1915. She was also a resident of the city home, the almshouse. She died of cancer of the stomach. Emil L. Nelson. Those of you who can see this stone here will see C.L. Nelson on it. This is the only place this name showed up as C.L. Nelson. All of the documents, and the documents were for a man who died on the schooner, A. Kinberg. So it's the same man, but all the documents listed him as Emil L. Nelson. So regardless of what's carved in stone, we've recarved it with Emil as his name on the monument. Wilbur Horatio Nelson, who is also known as Horatio Wilbur or Andrew Nelson, died in 1905 of endocarditis at the Gilbert Hospital. Olaf Olsen, a widowed fisherman, died of tuberculosis. Peter Olsen, 1857 to 1912, died suddenly of heart disease at his job at the Cape Ann Anchor Works, Charles O'Neilla and Mary Sandlin O'Neilla were probably husband and wife. There's missing that one linking document, but they died. She died in 1918, and he died in 1919, just a couple of months apart from each other. And we believe they were husband and wife. Thank you.
Can you tell that Sharon's the one that did the research? Melissa Hobbs.
Levi Page, about 1865 to 1922. George M. Pelton, 1849 to 1915, died of gangrene. Mary Ann King Phillips, 1847 to 1909, born in the Western Islands. This term was used for both the Azores and islands off Scotland, but the family did not speak English, so were most likely Azorians who anglicized their name. John Beastnilla, question on his birth, but died in 1817. Roswell Pinkham, 1844 to 1906, tuberculosis. Stillman Pinkham, 1884 to 1915. Catherine Barry Powers, 1854 to 1907. Frank H. Reese, 1833 through 1909. Amanda Malvina Rich, 1845 to 1908. William H. Rogers, 1838 to 1907, a fisherman who died suddenly on Gloucester's Wharf, probably of heart disease. Annie Martin Rowe, 1865 to 1905. Her husband, John Greenleaf Rowe, a sailmaker, preceded her in death only a month before on November 11, 1905. Mary E. Rowe, 1912 to 1913, was 4 months, 7 days old when she died suddenly on 29 January 1913 from an overdose of a cough medicine, probably. Her grandmother is buried here too. Otto Suxa, 1875 through 1910. Celerius, there's a death certificate for infant son Celerius, an unattended stillbirth. Kalea Saraka, about 1863 through 1909, alias Alex Martin. Vivian Sheffield, 1929. Felix L.F. Silvanen, 1858 through 1913. His daughter Martha and his wife Helen are buried in the same row. Helen Silvana, 1862 through 1914, died of tuberculosis and was preceded in death by her daughter. Martha M. Silvanen, 1896 through 1914, only 18, daughter of Helen. They resided at 3 Langsford Street. And May or Mary Simmons immigrated from the Azores.
And finally, Chris Maney.
Agnes J. Wynne Smith died in 1917. Elvira Soderston lived from 1879 to 1908. John E. Stedman was born 1844 and died in 1914. Harry Stewart lived from 1835 until 1916. Francis Stone died in 1908. Angus Stewart born circa 1854, died on July 14th, 1909. George Stewart, born circa 1836, died in 1905. Sarah Ida Terry, born 1895 and died in 1933. She is one of those that has a rare stone located here in the Paupers lot. Susan Susie Anderson Terry, born circa 1860 and died in 1928. Margaret King Thompson lived from 1828 until 1909. Lydia Hagath Tawika, she was born in 1883, but she died in 1911 due to septicemia following the birth of her son, Anki Edward Tawika, who died at the age of 2 in New Hampshire in 1913 of influenza. Lydia's husband, who also died of influenza, is buried here as well. Oscar Tawika lived from 1879 until 1918. Adam Wane was born in 1871 and died in 1907, a 36-year-old married laborer from Finland. When he arrived here, he was described in the following manner. He had $10 in his possession, was in good mental and physical health, stood 5 feet 6.5 inches tall, had a brunette complexion, brown eyes, and black hair. Nathaniel Wagner, he lived from 1887 to 1906. Catherine Nickerson Smith Westland, she was born in 1837. After the death of her husband in 1901, she took in washing until in her 70s. Then she moved to the city poor farm, where she lived till she was 84, dying in 1921. Gertie E. White, she was born in 1870 and died in 1908. M. Parker Whitman lived from 1865 to 1915, and he died by drowning. At the time of his death, he was a cook. George E. Wiggins, he was born in 1886. He was a fisherman, and he went missing on the 14th of March, 1911. His body was found in Gloucester Harbor on the 1st of June, 1911. Sarah L. Winning, she died in 1916. Sana Litha Dalviti was also known as Sana Winterroad because in Finnish the word Dalviti means a winter road. She died in 1918 of influenza. So, in addition to all these people that we have honored by name, it's important for you all to know that there are unknown people buried here as well. They're known to be 5 unknown adult men, 1 woman, and 1 infant. 2 of the unknown men were found floating in the harbor, one in 1906 and the other in 1908. 2 other unknown men were killed by a train accident. One was described as cut in pieces, was discovered on December the 10th, 1907, and a second man was found dead at the Maplewood Crossing in 1908. An unknown infant was found floating in the harbor and was buried here in 1914. The unknown woman was buried here in 1922 and was discovered on Salt Island. In finale, thinking about all that lived and died and were buried here, there's one section that brings your attention to where those small granite blocks are that outline a very special section of unknowns as well. Skeletal remains, as well as children. And what is known right now through the research is that there is 1 infant buried in that special lot, again blocked by the granite blocks, as well as skeletal remains from a body found on Coffin Beach, as well as Magnolia Woods.
Thank you. That concludes our reading of the names. We'd like to thank you for coming today and honoring these residents of Gloucester. The stone, of course, will be here for a long, long time. And if you're interested in any of the biographies, the research that was done by Sharon Cohen and by Sandy Williams in the archives is all posted on the cemetery's website, in the city website area. Thank you for coming.